So as was suggested, I'm just going to take from the microscope started in 1600. There was a great excitement about seeing microstructures, and this is a hand drawing by Robert Hooke of the head of an insect fly. Now I think this art is lost. We just take pictures, but this hand drawing really shows it. And my emphasis always is, each one of us has an artist in our heart and brain and hand. Only thing we don't use it. And this is an example that how beautifully and precisely, I don't think any photograph would have shown all the details in one simple larger object to image size ratio. And more important is the fineness of detail that you can distinguish. I'll come back to these 2 points a little later. But the highest typical resolution in optical microscope is about 200 nanometer. And confocal microscope also same, standard confocal. But when you go to top of super resolution confocal microscope, they claim up to 50 nanometer, but usually we remain between 100 to 120 nanometer. Some claim that one can go to 50 or even less, but that's a very difficult situation. Electron microscope, of course, one can go to less than 0.1 nanometer or even less, and that's where we have enormous detail. And one of the important development in electron microscopy for biological sciences, cryo-electron microscopy, where you do not need to fix, and therefore you can look tissue as they would have been in the live situation, and one can look at more details. And this is just to give you an idea about the resolution, what we mean by resolution. Human eye can see up to this level about what we call as a few 0.1 millimeter is the best that we can resolve. Electron microscopy, like scanning electron microscopy, has a much lower resolution than transmission, and so it ranges and can go up to the atomic scale. And this is what has to be understood, that why this resolution is important and how it is calculated. Now this is how a typical standard contact with the light source here, light gets reflected up down the condenser, and this is an important function. And I think to get the best of microscope, we must learn how to adjust the proper illumination. We can get a light, all right, but then we can't get good resolution unless the light is properly centered, properly the diaphragm size is controlled, and so on. And that's what this condenser does, that function in an upright microscope. Then objective, and then of course light can be passed on to the eyepiece, or it can go to the camera digital system. For fluorescence, we have a mercury lamp or some other arc lamp on the upside here, from which light comes. There is a reflector here that sends the light down the objective, and then internal reflection will send you the fluorescent light back to the objective, and then it passes the Badger filter. I'll come to this part later, and then you see the object, the fluorescence, and so on. Of course, much of this gets electronically controlled now, and manual control is much less. I personally prefer more manual control. Then I can adjust the microscope as I want. But automated ones are exactly as they are set, unless you can tweak with them. But this is what, for most convenient system, the automated systems are what is being most commonly used. Now, these pictures show what we mean by magnification and resolution. Now, these are, of course, my favorite preparation, polyclinic chromosomes to soft lab, one of the most suited preparation to look at gene expression in real, and we see a much wider field, but much less detail. We go to a 20x objective, we see more detail, a smaller field. When we go to 40, we see more details, but still narrower field, and when we go to image, doesn't resolve. For example, the 10x objective image that you saw is magnified to the same level as this 100x objective, and you can see the difference. We are simply magnifying, we are not able to resolve. So the quality of the image depends on the original resolution and which are taken, not just by electron magnification, be it digital or otherwise. That doesn't serve the purpose, and that's where the quality of objective, quality of illumination that is set up, provides you the real quality images, and that must be regularly followed. Now, the numerical part here is calculated by Rayleigh and Abbe and others, as basically that the delta x is the distance between these two objects which you can resolve, which must exist so that you can resolve them as two separate objects. And this is given by the formula a constant 0.61, lambda, the wavelength in which you are examining, and the denominator is n is refractive index of the medium, and sine theta is the sine value of the angle on which the cone, light cone goes on. And so this and sine theta is often called as numerical aperture. That gives the value of the numerical aperture. And so an approximate, because this is a constant 0.61, and a very rule of thumb, we say simply that the delta x or the limit of resolution is lambda by twice NA. NA value is given on each objective. What is this NA value? But that value is operational or functional or useful only when the elimination system properly adjusted. If you don't adjust the elimination system, NA has no meaning. And you won't be able to resolve. To understand this resolution, let's look at each point through which light passes by in any image. Any image is made of numerous number of points or pixels in digital language, as we say. So in a cell, for example, when light passes through a cell, each point is taken as a circular diffraction grating point kind of a system, and light gets diffracted. And because of that, what happens is from Airy disk, because Airy was the optical person who had defined these things. So these are called Airy disks. And because of these Airy disks, that because of the main light and then these rings around it, if two objects are very close by, these Airy disks overlap. But if they are further away, still closer, even the central part begins to overlap. And if that happens, you can't resolve these 2 points as separate objects. But these you can, because you are just, these two central points are still distinct. Although the Airy disks are overlapping, but the central main point is separate, and therefore you can resolve. And this is defined, what will the diameter of the Airy disk is defined by the NA of the objective. Lower objectives have lower NA, high power objectives have higher NA. But then it's not necessary that every 100x objective will have 1.4 NA or 1.25 NA. It depends on what's the kind of objective that is made, what kind of glass that is made, and how the lenses are arranged, and what's the immersion medium. Microscopes have two kinds of objectives. One is called dry objective. When between the objective and the cover slip or your object is air. Another set of objectives are immersion objectives. Immersion objectives can be water immersion, glycerol immersion, or oil immersion. Water immersion we use when we are trying to look at cells in culture or organs in water, so that the object can be dipped in water and can be used to focus. They don't get affected by water. But any immersion objective you want to use without an immersion medium, you won't see anything. A water immersion objective, you cannot use glycerol, and you can use oil, and vice versa. It's the oil which gives the highest refractive index. The most, the powerful objectives that are now available with high refractive index, standard is 1.4, but some are claiming that they can give a refractive index of 1.5, which requires certain specific parameters. And so obviously higher the refractive numerical aperture, smaller is the Airy disk, and therefore better is the resolution. Now, these are different kinds of optical systems that you can use. This, for example, this is a mitotic cell, same mitotic cell at metaphase, unstained. You don't see much because you don't have contrast between the object and the background. The polarized microscopy makes use of polarized waves. That means whatever light waves are oscillating in all 360-degree angles. Polarized light means that all the waves that constitute a beam of light oscillate in one particular plane, and that plane you can define. Whether they will oscillate in this plane or in this plane or whichever plane you can decide. And thereby, they let us understand the orientation of molecules in the cell. For example, in this case, let's say this microtubule spindle, it is made up of all microtubule fibers arranged in one particular direction. And therefore, in polarized light on a particular polarization, it will appear dark. But if you go to the reversing polarization, it will appear brighter. And that's what we call birefringence. get rid of this.
So return. It's the menu button.
Because it allows you to look at objects in a kind of pseudo three-dimensional view and allows better contrast, better than phase contrast. This one is phase contrast, which is widely used, but then DIC involves more parameters in the microscope. It needs a polarizer, it needs an analyzer, it needs the Wollaston prism, 2 or 3 of them, but it gives much better resolution, much better. The emitted light of particular wavelength falls on an object. Certain atoms electrons in that object, so atoms get excited, move to a higher orbit. For example, this is what happens: that a certain quantum of light comes onto this, excites some electron to move to an outer orbit because of the energy that is received. But then this becomes an excited or unstable state. And if it reverts back immediately, this immediate is an important point to understand. If it reverts back immediately to its ground state, it has to release that much energy. Now that energy that it absorbed as photon, a part of that energy goes out at heat, and therefore the energy that comes out as light has a lesser level and object, and this then emits a higher wavelength. Now we need a filter which will cut off the excitation beam wavelength, allow only the higher wavelength to pass through. And this is what is done in a fluorescence microscope using this kind of filter tubes, where light of a particular wavelength is allowed to fall through. There is a dichroic mirror that sends a light down to the objective of that particular wavelength, falls on the object, cause excitation of fluorescence, and internal reflection sends both the excitation beam and the emission beam of the objective. And then this dichroic mirror has a very interesting property. When light falls on this, it is a complete reflection. When light rays come on this in this direction, it's completely transparent. And so now all the excitation beam as well as the emission beam that come from the object travel back. But now we put a barrier filter which will allow only the fluorescent light to pass through and stop the excitation beam. And this is what happens in a fluorescence of the microscope, that you have one filter block which has no filters. Actually, that's for transmission, normal light microscopy. Then we have for blue excitation, green excitation, red excitation, and so on. And so each one of them has 3 sets of filters. One, the excitation filter, through which the excitation beam will come through. A dichroic lens here, which in this direction reflects the light down. Previous, right? Okay, all right. All right. So this is what happened. That typically we use a mercury lamp here because it provides very strong light beam and entire wavelength from ultraviolet to infrared. All the wavelengths are part of this, and so this light comes through this a series of lenses and series of filters that can be built in here to the excitation filter, which selects particular wavelength that will be passed on to the fluorochrome there, and then both these green and the red fluorescent light travel through. Dichroic mirror lets both of them pass through, but now we have a red filter here which will not allow green, allow only the red to pass through, and that's how we see the fluorescence. The filters that we use can be different kinds. They can be wide band pass filter, that means they can allow either this whole part of spectrum or this part of spectrum, or will block anything below a certain wavelength, allow anything above a certain wavelength. That's broad band pass. They are not very good for fluorescence. So you can get a brighter image, but you will not be able to get the fine fluorescence that you want to see, because it can have multiple fluorescence coming out. Then there are narrow band pass. That means they allow only a narrow band of wavelengths to pass through them. They are very precise, although the fluorescence quantum yield will be less in this. And then there are a long pass and short pass filters. So it depends upon what kind of fluorochromes you have, what is the excitation spectrum and emission spectrum. One can choose this. The narrow band pass filters are more expensive. The long pass ones are less expensive, and these are intermediate, like wide band pass. They are intermediate in cost. So depending upon what you want, one can select the kind of filters. Now this is what, and in between there are DIC and phase counters and so on, and then this is the confocal head, which ensure the confocality of what it is. And I'll now try to explain why we need a confocal. This image is of a certain tissue, these two different tissues, with a standard what you call fluorescence microscope. If there's a thick tissue, you don't get sharp image of any particular plane. But same thing, if you look with confocal, we begin to see more details. Same tissue examined with wide field, and it goes confocal or this and this, and we begin to see wider details. And that's where the question comes: how does it happen? What we need to imagine is, for example, think of this as a cell. It has x-axis, y-axis, and a z-axis. When you look at light passing through this, light from each plane is reaching your eyes. We have very good eye accommodation system, so that we can, for example, I'm looking at the cortisone and each one can be focused depending on where it is. But a microscope has glass lenses which cannot accommodate, which cannot change the thickness or something. And therefore, if the object is focused at this plane, only this image will be sharp, but images coming from upper and lower planes will be unsharp. There will be less focus. In bright field, it may not make so much of difference, but in fluorescence, your fluorescent light, against a dark background, bright visible light is coming in, and that gives this kind of blurred image over a sharper image. And what confocal does it has a system whereby each plane can be focused at the same time, and thereby can build up. So this is a digital building up that happens. And the principle is like this. If you look in a fluorescence microscope, this is the mercury lamp, light comes in, there is an excitation filter so that we select blue light only going down, and let's say these are the layers of the tissue that you're examining. And your objective is focused at this particular plane. But fluorescence is being emitted from all these planes, and these are all being internally reflected and traveling through the objective through the dichroic and so on, and all these light waves are coming, reaching your detection system. Be it your eyes, be it your camera. But then only this focus, the fluorescent light will be in focus here, but the other planes will be out of focus, and therefore you get this kind of blurred image. So same thing in the fluorescence microscope. Now the basic difference between fluorescence and control microscope is these two things. One pinhole here, one pinhole here, an iris diaphragm. One in the excitation part, one in the observation part. And that's why it's called confocal. That these two pinholes are identically focused at this object. That's the basis for calling confocal, that two pinholes are focusing at same point at same time. And they will move in synchrony. If this pinhole moves on this side, this will also correspondingly move on that side. But one problem that happens with confocal is that instead of eliminating the whole area of the objective, you are eliminating a single small point of the object at one time. And therefore, in confocal, we cannot see an object in real life. You cannot see anything through your eyepieces. You need to collect these images digitally. But the important point is that because of this diaphragm, you see, it simply makes use of a simple optical principle, that the light rays that are focused are in the center of the cylinder of light that's going in, whereas the unfocused one are periphery. So all that you do is you physically block all the light rays that are the peripheral part of the field of view and allow only the focused light to go in. That's it. And the important point is that this pinhole and this pinhole have to be confocal. They must not only focus at the same point, but they must move in synchrony with each other. That's what the confocal principle basically is. So there are light rays in and out of focus, in focus, but only in focus light rays are allowed to reach the optical detection system. And so basically what we do is this beam, the point of light that's coming in is made to scan along this in x-axis, move a step in y-axis, again scan each point, move again in y-axis, again scan each point, and these distances, how much it will move in x-y direction, and that's where the whole this confocal scanning head becomes a model of mechanical and digital things together. That you must have very precise motors, precise mirrors that can oscillate and move by less than a micrometer. You can choose 0.2 micrometer distance, you can choose 0.5 micrometer distance that each axis will do. And then once you've covered this, scan this whole thing, then you can make the objective move down by a step, down or up, to focus the next layer. So in that axis again, you can control the movement of the stage or the objective by a predetermined distance, in sections. So the important point, those, how many of you have done histology, tissue sectioning, which is also something that confocal does, but the only thing is, each image is completely separate. You process the tissue, physically cut into thin slices. Here we are cutting them into thin slices, optical. Physically the whole, you go layer by layer. And because you are collecting image of one particular point at one time, we can't, as I said, we cannot see it in real time. All that we see, the image is in the software, and then we can manipulate that image as we want. For example, now one important point is the pinhole. If you open it too much or too less, your optical quality, confocality will vary. If you open it too much, that's what is wide field fluorescence microscope is doing. But we can decide whether we want to open it by 1 area unit, that means how far is the spread, that much, or we open more. If this is 1 area unit, for example, in the image here, same thing at high magnification, 1 area unit, we get this kind of image. If we make this pinhole wider open, we get brighter image, but then resolution is gone. You make it still more open, everything is merged. You don't see the final resolution. Then your image becomes more like normal fluorescence microscope. So this is what one must adjust. Ideally, your confocal pinhole should be 1 area unit. But sometimes fluorescence is very weak and you may not get it. Then you have to open it, but not open it so much to get a bright image and then lose everything. The other important point to remember in confocal microscopy is that this brightness, we often like very bright image, but then remember, once we do more than the required level of brightness, we are losing two kinds of information. One is the spatial resolution. You see, for example, the space difference between here and here is gone. The second is quantification. If you want to quantify how much is the red signal coming in, because that correlates with a certain amount of protein or certain amount of something else that you are using. If you want to quantify, remember all imaging system follow the sigmoidal curve. That if you are not in the exponential range, then whether you have more amount or less amount, the signal is same intensity. And therefore quantification, if you want to do, you must do initial trials to find out what setting of laser power, what setting of iris, what setting of gain, and what set of other thing gives you a signal which is quantitative, which is in the exponential range. And therefore, for example, if one wants to compare between a tissue which has a particular molecule in high quantity versus another which has low quantity, you should set up your confocal imaging with the tissue that has high quantity and make sure that it is in the, not in the saturation point, it's in the exponential range. And then go to the object that has, or the tissue that has lower quantity, so that you can make a direct comparison. And this is very important in any, because one important application of confocal microscopy is quantify specific molecule at a particular point in a cell. But if that quantification is recorded in a wrong way by undersaturation or oversaturation, then you can be very, very wrong in your signal collection and your interpretation. The other important problem that happens in fluorescence and also in confocal microscopy is bleed through. because each fluorochrome has a range of excitation and a range of emission. Now, this is not just one point, it is a range which can follow. For example, two fluorochromes, they have somewhat overlap. This gives emission spectrum up to this, but this other fluorochrome starts getting excited within this range. Now, if you are using these two fluorochromes together, then you will have something which is not because of this, but because of this. And therefore, that's what we call it bleeding through. So we must choose fluorochromes that have reasonably separate, distinct emission spectrum and excitation spectrum, so that we can image them simultaneously instead of, but one possibility can be that we can image them separately, but there will be always problems. So one must make sure, for example, in this case, two fluorochromes, you get image like this because these two fluorochromes have overlapping spectra. But if you use the same thing, you get distinct. Even if you merge, you don't get bleed through. So this is a very important issue that happens in fluorescence and confocal microscopy. Many more. There are multiple ways that you can collect because it can have different lengths of lasers or now diode lamps, which give you specific wavelengths, and your recorder that can collect different wavelengths. For example, these have been very famous images where in Drosophila embryonic development, before you see any shape in the egg, we already know that each nucleus is having different sets of proteins, and that's what they control. So each color represents a certain protein, and we can make out which proteins can overlap or which proteins are uniquely present in one cell type and so on. And so we have different kinds of systems happening, and that's where the great advantage that has happened because of this kind of microscopy, that you can look at things in real life. We can look at things in great detail. Now, I'll just give you example. These are some of the images from our labs where different students have taken. This is Drosophila larval brain. These are the brain hemispheres, and this is the ventral nerve cord. This part is what we call as eye imaginary disc. That will make the adult eye. Larva doesn't have an eye; it's inside, and this part is what will make the antenna of the adult. Now, so during larval period, we can see their differentiation happening. And we know lots of genes that are active. And inside, you see, they have very remarkable architecture, which is not seen by direct fluorescence microscopy. But once we go through confocal microscopy, we can look at same plane, different cells, different proteins stained with it. They give you a pattern. But more important, what I will show you is, in the next set of slides, is that if we look at this, if I go back, this is what we see with this kind of standard fluorescence microscope. We see whole layer. But if you want to see this thickness along with each optical section wise, then that's what we will see about from top to bottom. You can see each in an optical section. And that shows you details of each layer. Now what the software can do is, it can build up a three-dimensional image of this and can let you see it from each side. As if you are physically having this thing, you can look at from any side. And I'll try to show you some of those images. So these are individual optical sections, which is what we do when we do histological sections. You see the image in a particular plane. By the way, let me tell you, in the 1960s and 70s when confocal was not there, people did build up from histological sections three-dimensional structures. How did they do that? Can you imagine? Well, each slide, different section, you get a different image. Now, how do you build up a three-dimensional image from that? They are not digital. Then you can put them and superimpose and so on and so forth. Can you think of a suitable way? On transparent sheets, and then stack them. Only thing is, they must be placed absolutely point by point identical. The digital thing can do, but manually doing is, but it was done. They had done it. And that's how they did. They could tell us the three-dimensional image. See, this is what is important. If you want to do it, you have a way. You need to be innovative, and something can be done. This is what people in the 60s had done to build up three-dimensional structures from individual optical sections, historical sections. Now we do the same thing, and now fortunately for us, software does it in a jiffy. We don't need to worry about. give the computer the commands and you get an image. So that's what happens, for example, from this. Look at this image. It has built up layer by layer together and gives you absolute three-dimensional information how the molecules are. These are the optic. For example, each of this omatidium has 8 photoreceptor cells. They will send 8 exons. And so from each one of them, and there are about 700 of them, so imagine 5,600 exons. We can trace them, they come into an optic nerve, which then goes to the brain and spreads in a certain manner. Now you can build up this anatomy in a very precise way. You can follow up each axon if you want to do. Incident, this picture by Dr. Anand Tiwari, who is at Ahmedabad now, Dr. Roy's student, he got Best Confer Prize by JICE in 2007. And what is more exciting for us is, it was just 2 months when this microscope was installed in our lab. And he collected, and I think, see, microscopy can be an art as well. You need to have an eye to build up collect the images, arrange them, and while on one hand it gives you the anatomy and functional part of it, it also gives something to look at beautifully. Now, the same thing, now you see, we can look at from different angles, as if you want to see this side, this side, this side. You are seeing a virtual, so you can know which part is on top, which part is on bottom, and how they are to make a relationship. And that's what confocal microscopy allows you to do it. Now, this is another thing that one of my students, Dr. Anand Singh, had done it, that these HNRNP molecules, that they are present and they keep on moving. So you can do a live imaging, especially if the protein is tagged with a fluorochrome like GFP or RFP or MCD. There are a number of such molecules available which can be tagged with a given protein that you want to look at. And then you can look them in a live cell and you can follow them up. But because now what you're doing is, you are following x-axis, y-axis, z-axis, and t-axis, time axis. This is what, and then the fifth dimension that you can add is if you do a time lapse. So you can follow the same thing for a period of time. And that's what this happens. The other thing that we can do, for example, this is what we have been looking at with non-coding RNA, which the moment you stretch this cell, the proteins tend to accumulate at one particular point. And this can be seen in live imaging also, that you can see that these small dots will keep on disappearing. And they'll keep on accumulating at this becomes larger and larger. This is over a period of 30 minutes. And so actually, this is what one can appreciate, that within a minute of cell experiencing high temperature, molecules start behaving differently. And that's what we can see here. And then, so after the stress, everything has come at this point. If you allow the cells to recover, see what happens. This, of course, we can see time for each image, but we can build up a movie and then see what happens. Why did it stop showing? Okay. You see the, why is that happening? But you see the whole thing disappears. So what these kinds of imaging allows us to do is look at real time. We can't see direct on the microscope, but we can collect these images, store them, and see them as we want to do it. There are a large variety of software that are available to analyze these, what speed they are coming out, what size particles are there, what do they contain. We can look at multiple combinations. The other thing that has now happened is software, confocal. For example, this is a deconvolution program that, which again makes use of the point spread function of Airy disk. That from a point, the light is brightest in the center and it spreads with dimmer and dimmer. And that's why you see, for example, this is the distribution of RNA polymerase II on polyethylene chromosomes. Wherever the genes are active, there is high content. But this is a standard confocal microscope. It gives good resolution, we can identify, but the same can be processed through software. Now this image looks like confocal, but it's not confocal, it's deconvolution. That means you are simply eliminating out of focus points from the image. And there are a number of such applications available. I hope some of you may be familiar with the Image software, which is a publicly available free software. Anybody can download it and use it, Image. It's also called Fiji, F-I-J-I. So it's free to download on Windows or Mac, any system, and it allows hundreds of functions and absolutely free, no cost involved. Whereas the same thing if you were to buy from companies like Zeiss or Nikon or Olympus or something, you'll spend 10-15 lakhs and still limited functionality. This is remarkable that has happened. That Image, and there are a number of other such softwares. So what is now happening, for example, this particular software, SSRF, somebody developed it, linked it with Image. For example, 3 years ago, this was not available on Image. So somebody developed this algorithm, and Image became, so now you can download it along with, and when you put the same image, for example, this is what has been done. This image, we place in Image software, Excel process it with SRRF, and we get this out. You don't need a confocal. Of course, confocal will give certain other things that you cannot get it, but it still works very well. Now, I just come to my conclusion point that we are off this out. These images were drawn in 1890s, not 1990, mind it, 1890s. They provided some of the fundamentals of cell biology, cytology, cell functioning, embryology. For example, this is how an eschar is the roundworm that infects horses, its zygote develops. And Bovary, who was one of the great scientists, great experts in embryology, those of genetic students would have heard the name Sutton and Bovary, who gave the chromosomal base of inheritance idea. But Bovary was not that. Bovary was more an experimental embryologist and a cancer biologist. He published a paper in 1914 describing why cancer develops. And what we have been doing since for more than 100 years now is confirming what he has predicted. Of course, in more modern ways of oncogenes, proto-oncogenes, chromosomal instability, DNA damage, and so on. So, but these are hand drawings by Bovary, how the zygote develops. And of course, he had discovered a unique phenomenon there, that as the somatics are developed, they lose 95% of chromatin, which he called chromatin diminution. And this is now we are looking at the development biology of it. But why I am showing these images is, let's not forget that our eyes will do much better than what we do with them. And of this, I have compared here mitosis drawings by Fleming in 1872, when he discovered mitosis. Remember, Fleming had no teacher to tell him this is prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase, which we now teach our students or we learn from textbook. He was the one who discovered this. And this is important, that how we identify that they go in this process. Cells are not arranged linearly like this, that okay, you have first prophase cell and then a metaphase and so on and so forth. He had to imagine. And what he imagined, now of course we can see in real life as well. But the same stages, if you look at confocal, see, I've given the comparison of the microscope that he would have used and what we can use now. All right. But with this kind of microscope, these are the drawings. And I leave it to you to decide which is better, which gives you more information. My bet is certainly these series of drawings, not this. It only tells you where is spindle, where is chromatin. That's it, nothing else. But looking through normals, this is just conventional staining, hematoxylin staining that he used. And then he could see everything. He could see spindle, he could see spindle fibers, he could not, you see, remember, today we can imagine, he didn't know what these are. He only saw them. And this is what is important. What you wanted to do it. And that's where comes the important point, that when we use these microscopes, when we use these automated systems, we must not